Hi, everybody. Welcome to the October meeting of the Boston chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby. Yes, and tonight we're very happy to have with us Jen Benson. So Jen is the president of the Alliance for Business Leadership, a nonprofit coalition of business leaders advocating for progressive policy solutions. She joined ABL in 2020 after 11 years in the Mass House of Representatives. During her time in the legislature, Jen served as chair of the Joint Committee on Health Care Financing, as well as chair of the Joint Committee on Consumer Protection. Throughout her time in the House, she was a progressive champion for bold environmental and energy policy. With the help of passionate advocacy groups like Citizens Climate Lobby, her environmental justice-focused carbon pricing bill garnered the support of over 100 of her colleagues and is being used as model legislation in other states. As the president of ABL, Jen also serves on the steering committee of the New England for Offshore Wind Coalition and the executive committee of transportation for Massachusetts. So tonight, Jen will be telling us about current environment-related campaigns at ABL. So Jen, the floor is yours.
Hi, well, thank you, Gary. Thanks so much, everyone, and Rebecca for inviting me and talking to me about all the work that you're doing, and thank you for what you're doing. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. So as Gary said, I spent 11 years in the House of Representatives, and while I was there, I got to take a lot of leadership roles and cajole many of my former colleagues into supporting some environmental legislation, particularly carbon pricing, which, a lot of the work that I did in filing the first carbon pricing bill in the House of Representatives here in Massachusetts was to really teach, educate my colleagues about what that meant and what that really looked like and how to incorporate environmental justice provisions into that legislation. And we improved upon it in the years that I refiled that bill. And I'm really happy to say that Bill Driscoll took that up. I passed that off to him. We've worked together to further strengthen that bill. And I'm really, really excited to see him take that forward. And so when I came out of the legislature and moved to ABL, one of the things that I was really excited about was to really energize the business community in taking a stronger lead in environment, because one of the areas that I felt was holding us back in the legislature was the excuse that the business community didn't like it. We couldn't move forward, or we couldn't be bold enough because the business community wasn't behind us. And my goal in taking over at ABL was to eliminate that excuse. I felt that the time was ripe to really bring the business community along, and for those who are already there to really strengthen and focus their voice in the areas that really, really matter. And so to use the experience I had not only in the legislature, but in developing these policies and help to beef up those policy chops in ABL. So environment isn't the only thing we work on, but interestingly, in my work there, what I have tried to do, and something that always aggravated me in the legislature, was to break down silos of policy areas and really understand sort of the intersectionality of all of these different areas. And often climate is at the heart of many of them. So we work on transportation issues, affordable housing issues, workplace opportunity and equity issues, social equity and justice issues. And a lot of times, the thing that cuts across all of these areas is environmental justice and social justice. These are very, very related. And so if you look at sort of how decisions have been made around urban planning, transportation planning, where and how affordable housing has been planned and built in our cities, in our suburbs, and lack thereof, right? A lot of this comes back to the impact on climate, the impact on health, the impact on access to transportation, where highways are built, where trees are planted, it's all related. And so one of the areas that I've really tried to bring home to my members at ABL is to understand that these are not separate and distinct issues, that they are related. And we have to understand that they're all related as a quality of life issue for everybody here in Massachusetts, because it's not just about having access to transportation for people in the urban core. It's about quality of life for folks sitting in their car on Route 2, which is what I did for 11 years, driving in from Lunenburg, Massachusetts. You know, we're all connected. And one of the reasons that it's been so hard, I think in many ways, to fight against more conservative voices is because it's been so easy to divide and conquer. We have to understand how we're all linked through all of these issues. And so as we have moved into talking about specific policies at ABL, we have to start understanding sort of all of the layers of impact for all of us. So offshore wind, I think, is one of the areas that Gary talked about, and that's a great example. So, you know, offshore wind has a lot of benefit from a renewable energy point of view. We have a great natural resource here in Massachusetts and New England, in that we have sort of a geological benefit from our shores being great for building offshore wind. We have a great ocean shelf for building offshore wind. We have really sustainable winds off our coast for building offshore wind. And when I speak to, you know, partners in Denmark, they say, gosh, you know, we wish we had what you have, right? And so we have this natural resource. So we have that going for us. We have the ports that are ready to be built up to support this natural resource, right? We have the workforce to be able to support those resources. We have the educational facilities. We have the labor workforce. We have brought on our trades, who are now, which 5 years ago, when I was in the legislature, the trades were fighting against a burgeoning renewable energy green jobs initiatives, and now they are on board. They are members of the New England for Offshore Wind Coalition. The AFL-CIO is a member, right? They're with us. And so they see the benefit for their members. So we have this ecosystem ready to support it. But the other thing it does is it supports all of these inland blue collar jobs like manufacturing. It supports our public higher ed institutions like UMass Boston and Bristol Community College, right? It supports UMass Lowell with their research facility on offshore wind right now. So we have all the pieces in place. And we need to maximize and leverage that for the Massachusetts economy. So ABL believes that businesses can do the right thing and do good at the same time. That's our goal, right? And so my business leaders come in and say, wait a minute, this is actually a great business opportunity, and it's actually good for people. So let's figure out how to invest. And so we're investing in something that is going to make us money, but it's also investing in something that has good social capital too, right? So we are looking for these positive benefits, both from a monetary point of view, but from a social point of view. It's good from a social point of view, not for the obvious reasons, because we know it is. From a renewable energy point of view, it's good for our climate. It creates jobs, and it creates jobs at every strata. So it's not just creating jobs for the top few, it's creating jobs at every level, right? So this is the way that ABL approaches these big issues. And I think it's a very, very different way than we've seen the business community approach these issues in the past. When I was a rep, we would hear over and over again, we can't do this, it's going to cost businesses money. That was always the fear. It was the fear of it's going to raise the cost of doing business, and it's already an expensive place to do business here in Massachusetts. So energy prices are already high, wages are already high, housing prices are already high. Why would we add to this cost? ABL looks at it as this is a benefit of doing business in Massachusetts. We're doing it for the right reasons, and we're actually benefiting from it. It's an opportunity to make money and do good at the same time. So we're constantly looking for those opportunities. So, I will add, so this is more about not specific policy, I guess, but more about the theory of change that we bring toward a lot of these ideas. My concern, and so one of the things that we do a lot of as well is a lot of public outreach, a lot of public education. So we have events, we write op-eds, we partner with, other expert partners like Acadia Center and Ceres and MAPC and others. My fear is we're looking at the bright, shiny thing and we're forgetting about some of the other steps it takes to realize that, like we need to update our grid. One of the reasons I was really excited to be a founding member of the New England for Offshore Wind Coalition is because New England shares a grid. And that grid is not well managed and not well maintained. And if we don't do the work we need to do to upgrade that grid, to make sure that it's working to bring in all of that renewable energy from wind, from solar, and getting it back out to the users who need it in an efficient and sustainable way, then it doesn't matter how many, whether it's 4,000 or 5,600, how much we're purchasing, it won't matter because it's not going to get to where it needs to go. And that's some of the pieces that nobody's talking about and what we're trying to work on educating folks about, that we need to not only talk about the fun things, but we need to talk about the technical pieces too. So I'm hoping, and I know you guys are all talking about that already, but these are the little quiet pieces that ABL is also trying to bring to the fore because it's all connected. So as far as, climate, how we do this, we have policy councils of business leaders who are interested in these issues. And so we have a climate and renewable energy council with 25 business leaders, some of whom work in the industry, some of whom do not. They're just interested in this. And we get together with experts. We have met with members of the legislature, members of the administration. We have other experts coming in, educating them where they can say, these are the things that I care about, and they have that direct voice. We have a housing council, same thing. We have a transportation roundtable where we have business leaders, transportation advocates meeting with the labor community and housing advocates together to talk about how do we solve these things as a holistic solution. And then we have a workplace equity council where we dig deep into what are the things that are holding people back from achieving success in the workplace. Right now, we're working on how can the business community help solve childcare issues. So we're looking at ways the business community can solve, not ways to say, stop, you're doing too much, we don't want change. We're actually looking to push more change. So that's the goal for ABL. A little bit different than probably any other business organization, but that's what we're trying to do.
Great, thanks. One question just to kind of kick things off. You mentioned the high energy costs that people talk about, in Massachusetts, and I I can't think about associated industries in Massachusetts without hearing in the back of my mind somebody saying, but electricity already costs more than twice the national average or something like that. Do you hear a lot of that? And is that still a factor, or are people beginning to understand that we're just, eventually everybody's going to catch up with us, or we're going to get out ahead of the curve and we're going to have cheaper, renewable than anybody else. And so our electric rates will be better. What is going on in that?
Yeah, we still hear it. We still hear it. AIM is actually getting a little bit better with that. And one of the reasons they're getting better is because now we have really hard data to show them. So with the numbers we're seeing coming in from the renewable projects right now, the data we're seeing coming in are way lower than any of the projected prices that we, what I'm not gonna say we, because I didn't think they were going to be that high, but what many people thought they were going to be. And so one of the things that ABL and the New England for Offshore Wind Coalition has been pushing for, and we actually filed our own legislation on a omnibus piece of legislation that much of what you probably saw the Speaker of the House refer to in his recent comments actually came from our legislation, was to eliminate price caps in the bids for offshore wind, because what that was doing was setting Massachusetts at a really unfair disadvantage to many other states in vying for these projects. And it really wasn't necessary. The costs were coming in so far lower than what we initially thought they would be. It was an unnecessary burden on Massachusetts to have to force this, right? And now even Governor Baker is coming out and saying, we don't really need these price caps as part of law in Massachusetts anymore. And so we're not seeing price as an issue with offshore wind. And this is what for years and years, if you look back at Cape Wind, one of the big, fear tactics used against that project, in addition to many others, was that it was going to be so expensive. The energy was going to be ridiculously expensive. Nobody could afford it. And it was going to drive up costs for ratepayers. And, what we're seeing now is that that is not true. Part of it is because the technology, now the cost of the technology has decreased. We're seeing, even since Block Island, which I was lucky enough to just go out to tour a month and a half or so ago, the turbines that they're putting in the ground now are so much larger, so much more efficient. And so you're getting more bang for the buck, right? And so those costs are naturally coming down. But the energy that we're seeing and the rates that we're seeing from this are dramatically lower than anybody had predicted at this point. I look back at Reggie, when Reggie first went into effect, and the price caps that were set initially were set so low. And because everybody thought, oh no, if we set it too high, the market's going to fail. And they were set so low, the market failed. I mean, it was so inefficient the first 2 years and they had to dramatically increase the prices because the market wasn't lucrative enough. Nobody cared, right? So I think there's been so much, not only misunderstanding, but just a lack of good economic modeling in a lot of ways on these markets. And I think we've seen time and time again that there's been a real fear, a measure of fear into these models that have not borne out.
Great, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions?
Sure. This is Jeff Clark. I'd like to follow up on what Gary asked because I think it poses the question, what are the costs or the drivers for the high cost of electricity in Massachusetts? Because it doesn't seem like I mean, the power sources we used or whatever don't seem to be what's driving it. So there must be something else behind that.
Yeah, I can't answer all of that. I mean, for sure, I can't. I think there's a combination of factors. I think one is our, our our mix of energy coming into New England is we don't have a really great transmission system of getting energy into New England. I think that's historically been one of the pointers that people have looked at. I think that, that's been one of the reasons why people have talked about increasing pipelines into New England, but there's been a lot of concern about adding more costs in the ground for pipelines rather than transitioning to more renewable energy. So there's this natural tension between those two things. Do we invest in aging infrastructure rather than investing in future technology? So there are tensions there. The other thing is when you have an aging, at least electrical and pipeline infrastructure, you're going to have a lot of line loss and inefficiency. We've seen that happen, especially within certain, it's worse within certain IOUs. So probably the one I am most familiar with is Unitil, because that's where I represented and lived through a catastrophic ice storm in 2009. I don't know, 8, 9, that winter when I first was elected, and learned way more about energy infrastructure than I ever wanted to know. And we were losing 15% line loss from aging electrical lines. So if you think about, 15% loss is enormous, right? So, and ratepayers are making up that difference. So there's a whole host of factors, but that's not to say other parts of the country aren't seeing those too. I can't answer why it's so much more pronounced for Massachusetts. We do have a system here in Massachusetts where the IOUs get to go before the Department of Public Utilities and get pretty significant rate increases on a regular basis. They do have to go before essentially a trial and argue for that, but they always get something. They are guaranteed a profit, an amount of profit return. So I don't know exactly what that looks like in other states, but I know the law and the regulation here in Massachusetts is pretty lucrative for the IOUs. So I think there's a whole host of, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm using gibberish. I should not do that. But yeah, I think there are, if you peel back the onion layers, there are a whole host of pieces, and there are a lot of people who make a lot of money on trying to figure this out. And I'm not one of them.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question. Pauline?
Thanks, Gary, and thank you so much for speaking, Jen. It's been very illuminating and interesting. I have a quick question that has nothing to do really with the businesses and stuff, but I'm wondering, where can I look up information about how wind in the ocean area, how it affects wildlife, specifically birds and migration? I just don't know where to look that up. Just very interested in that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, part of the New England for Offshore Wind Coalition, we have Audubon, we have many of the wildlife organizations as part of that. And so I'm really proud of that, because we made that part of our organizing template, that wildlife was at the core of everything that we were going to do. And our legislation that we filed actually has an entire section on wildlife protections. And so, I think that I'm glad you brought this up because it's often very much forgotten. People don't think to bring that up. So for one thing, the Audubon Society has a lot of information on this. And so I highly recommend looking at their work. The National Wildlife Fund also has a lot of information on this. You can also look at the New England for Offshore Wind Coalition website for pointers. And the Massachusetts chair, Amber Hewitt, is an expert. So she is the Wildlife Fund representative on the steering committee. And she is chairing the Massachusetts chapter. So, and the New England Aquarium is a member as well. So they've been actually working on the right whale issues. And so they have been making sure that their scientists and oceanographic experts have been helping us and advising us as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Jen. This has been really great. Thanks for coming and speaking with us tonight. Thank you also for ABL's letter of support to Elizabeth Warren, calling for a carbon price in the reconciliation measure. We really appreciate that. You're welcome to stick around if you'd like to see how CCL operates, but I know, as president of ABL, you're probably pretty busy.
My husband probably wants to see me too. And my dog is scratching at the door. So
that happens.
But I'll repost the, because I know some people came in late. Here's the yesterday's event we had on offshore wind. And then also you can see the event on that same YouTube channel that we had with Senator Markey recently. And you can get a sense of some of the work that we do. But thank you so much for inviting me.
Okay, have a good evening.
All right, thank you so much.
Bye now.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Yep.